Well, thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here moderating this panel today. I don't think this topic needs too much introduction, but suffice it to say the United States has never had a relationship like it has with China. Even when President Reagan was confronting the Soviet Union was not as much of an economic powerhouse, rival, and a partner as China is today. China is the largest geopolitical challenger to the United States. It's building its power, or building its military, flexing its power over global supply chains, but it's still also the United States' third largest trading partner and an essential supplier for many things we make in the United States, whether it's cars or defense goods, as we're seeing today with restrictions on rare earths coming out of Beijing. So I have a fabulous panel here to discuss some of these issues with me. Senator Mike Rounds of South Dakota, thank you for joining us. Horacio Rozansky, the President and Chief Executive of Booz Allen. Nadia Shadlow, a Senior Fellow at the Hudson Institute, and Representative Beth Van Dyne of Texas. So I thought to get us started, we'd just do a lightning round. I wanted to ask you, what do you think is the most underappreciated risk in the U.S.-China relationship right now? And what would you like, one topic, just kind of quickly, that you would like folks in the audience to walk away with today thinking more about? So Senator, let's start with you.
Thank you. Let's put it in perspective. You're correct, third largest trading partner. Rare earth minerals, well over 98% of our imports of rare earth minerals come from China. We do right at about $570 billion in trade per year with them, and yet trade delegate tells us that right now they steal about $600 billion in value with regard to intellectual properties on an annual basis. That makes for some very interesting interactions that we have to be aware of. I think if there was one thing that I would want the whole crew to walk away with is, number one, it's not our job to divest or to disassociate with China, but rather to de-risk our relationship with China.
We can just go down.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'll go next. If you, building on the Senator's comments, if you build this very simple framework that has cooperation, competition, combat, we are operating with China across the first three dimensions already in different areas. And we can talk about how each dimension plays with each other. I think there's not enough cooperation right now, and frankly, there's too much conflict. But at the end of the day, in my mind, because technology is the driving force in this century, the key to winning this and positioning ourselves in a way to be dominant is going to be speed. It's going to continue to be speed.
Well, I think there's actually a division among both the policy community and the business community about thinking about China as a long-term systemic ideological threat, or China as a power that sort of is a regional problem and it's focused on, sort of its region. And I think if you actually, depending on where you fall on that, and I think actually the administration is perhaps even divided on that question, you'll end up with a different set of policies. So I'm in the former camp, long-term systemic ideological threat, sort of in the same way that back, in the early days, 1970s, Nixon saw the Soviet Union in a very ideological way versus kind of a manageable power. So I think we end up with different policies.
I think we need to look at it in terms of the influence that China has on the rest of the world and where they've been and how we have acted, basically given them the vacuum to work in by not having trade agreements, by looking at how much money that they've invested in the infrastructure of, look at countries in Africa, countries in Latin America, and now starting in countries in the Middle East. And that influence that they're going to have, basically I was in Cambodia, I was with the Prime Minister of Cambodia, and I said, you have to understand, you're basically giving the future of your country away. And he said, look, we're starving. We would love to be able to eat a Big Mac, But we've got China who's handing us a bowl of rice. Come to the table. And I think we've got a lot of opportunities to be able to do that in the future, and I'm anxious to start.
Great. And I'll just open this up to all of you. Do you think that we need more decoupling with China, or do you think that there are some areas where being connected actually provides a stabilizing force? Mike, you mentioned de-risking. Horacio, you talked about cooperation versus conflict. Just kind of opening it up to all.
Yeah, look, you don't decouple. You can't decouple. We're interconnected, but you have to, number one, work towards a fair trade agreement. And then the other piece of this is you have to recognize that they are a strategic challenger for us on the military side. They are a near-peer competitor, and they have an advantage over us in one particular way. They are unified in terms of when Xi Jinping wants to move, it's not just the government that moves, but the entire rest of their economic activity is required to move the way that he wants them to move. We don't have that here. And so for us, we have to recognize that challenge. Now, I'm not suggesting we go the direction that they go, but we have to recognize their ability to move very, very quickly. There are some downsides to that as well, but we have to recognize that as we talk about our opportunities for development and our opportunities for staying ahead in terms of technologies and literally the intellectual properties that we have. What I would say is we've got to do a better job of protecting the intellectual properties that we've got, the most advanced types of technologies that we have, everything we can do to slow down their connection with that, protecting against that infiltration or defiltration of really good information that right now they're stealing from us on a regular basis. And they don't have a problem with doing so because, as their ambassador shared with me several years ago, you have to understand in our culture, we don't understand how someone can own an idea. Well, patents and copyrights are the ideas, and if they don't understand how somebody can own it, they're more than willing to simply take it because under their approach, nothing's wrong with that. And they're very, very good at infiltrating and taking that information and utilizing it.
I might have a slightly different frame. I think we do need to decouple in key strategic areas. I think we need to start considering what's happening today with rare earths, with magnets, with EVs, with chips. So at least we need to strive toward decoupling. The issue, Beth's point, is implementation going to be successful? But we should be putting into place policies now that we failed to put into place for 40 years. Because a little aside that I like to mention is that the mineral vulnerability problem that we've had is not a 10-year problem, not a 20-year problem, not a 30-year problem. It's a 40-year issue. In 1980, the Congress started to actually identify our vulnerability on critical minerals. So it really gives you a sense of inaction and the problems we've had and actually changing. So I think we do probably need to decouple in certain areas. Might not be successful, but.
I think that all of these things are in some ways not mutually exclusive, right? I mean, and in one area that we don't talk enough about is space, where we are absolutely competing. If you're following the news, China is in the process. There's a lot of ifs here, but if they're successful at building their computing constellation in space, that will give them a huge strategic advantage, and we cannot allow them to do that. At the same time, we share several interests in space. Low Earth orbit is getting over-proliferated, and we're going to get to the place where it's so congested that things are going to start bumping into each other. The US and China have their economies very much tied to the space infrastructure, where other parts of the world, Russia, for example, does not. And so Russia creating a disruption in orbit does not create as much problem for them as it does for the US and China. So these are areas where we could cooperate and create frameworks that allow us to operate seamlessly, while at the same time competing like crazy because we cannot allow them to take primacy on space compute power.
I look at, we have to decouple in some areas. We can't decouple fully. You think about the trade relationship we have, the number of American businesses that we have that are doing, work in China that use them as a market. But where I think, where it was mentioned earlier is in advanced manufacturing, whether or not that is looking at our defense manufacturing, semiconductors, pharmaceuticals, which I think is why you see this one big beautiful bill coming and saying we need to be able to take these manufacturing plants and have them onshore again. It is a strategic, but it is also very much a national security issue. And I think we also need to look at, when we are passing policies, not to have policies that advance the China objective. That are giving money away, and whether or not that was the CHIPS Act that when it was originally passed had all sorts of loopholes that China could be able to take money out of, whether or not it's strengthening our relationships with our universities so that they are not taking a ton of money from China and basically having an open avenue for our IP to be stolen, or whether or not it's just sending money there. I would say with our Inflation Reduction Act and all of the Green New scam programs that they created that was just funneling money over to China, we need as lawmakers to prevent that from happening.
Great.
And I think it's also a problem. The decoupling argument, it gets even more complicated because so many items are dual-use items, right? There isn't a clear distinction between what is purely military and what is purely civilian, and so that makes it complicated.
Mm-hmm. I would suggest one thing with regard to the decoupling, though. And look, when we talk about our best technologies, our most capable compute powers and so forth, we need to do everything we can to keep that here and to do the computational activities here. China, if we simply restrict and say, we're not going to provide you any compute power, then they're going to create their own capabilities. And I'd much rather have us sell compute power to them, but not at the most advanced degrees to where it becomes a threat to us with regard to our military operations. And that's the part that I think concerns me the most, is I don't want to force them to create their own advantages, while at the same time I don't want to lose the ability to market those items that are not the highest in terms of technological capabilities, but still a very good market for us today. So that fine line between the most advanced capabilities versus those run-of-the-mill capabilities, I'd like to have us be able to split that baby a little bit.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Nadia, I wanted to go back and ask you again about rare earths and others as well, if you'd like to jump in. So since the president really ratcheted up tariffs on China in April, the Chinese have answered back by setting up this global licensing system for rare earths, and that's really threatened U.S. makers of electric vehicles, but also defense goods, other industries. It seems like that tension is continuing and motivating one of the president's tweets this morning, potentially. What can the United States do about this? Do you think the Trump administration is doing enough to address U.S. dependence on China? It seems like there's no real quick fix to this issue.
Yeah, I mean, there is not a quick fix, right? The point I just made, that this has been a problem for a long, long time. So there is no quick fix, and I think we are in a pretty vulnerable situation now. But I think there's the misconception of just being about mining rare earths and processing, right? And so now it's actually become much more part of the public discourse. The two are related but also separate. So we need to really focus also on the element of where can we get processing up and ready. I mean, I've spoken to companies that have told me, Nadia, we can go out and develop the contracts with companies around the world, mining companies that would be happy to sell material to us, but we have no place to process. So there are companies in America today that can do processing. We need to get money and funding to them quickly, purchase orders, maybe use the Defense Production Act, use money that DoD has now, that it can act pretty quickly. So we need to act. We do not need more studies identifying the dependencies. We have a ton of studies. Not to be critical of the Biden administration previously, because there are always studies in government, but the 100-day supply chain reviews and these giant reports that were produced, there wasn't a lot of new material in them. It was a further documentation of problems that we've known for a while. So the most important thing now would be to focus on the inputs into getting processing done quickly, working with allies and partners, looking at other countries around the world who can process quickly in Asia, and identifying those countries. Where are the facilities now? That might be a little report we need quickly, unless one exists. But I'm sure one exists. Maybe some of your companies out there.
I go back to the speed issue.
Yeah.
I mean, the challenge is we actually don't fully understand how many rare earth deposits we actually have in this country.
Right.
And there's probably, and with new technology, just like happened with shale and everything else, there's the opportunity to do much cleaner, much better extraction of what's here. And then the processing piece, as you said, it just takes forever to get these plants up and running. And that is discouraging investment and everything else.
But why does it take so long?
Yeah.
Well,
Right? This is a government problem.
Yeah.
We do it to ourselves. Whether or not it's dragging out the permitting fees or dragging out the permitting time and adding additional fees, adding additional hurdles to it, or it's allowing other people in having it brought into our country, importing it, as opposed to doing it here.
Right.
We do this to ourselves. I think we need.
Last time I was in Taiwan, the chip manufacturers were talking about the fact that they can put a new fab up in 18 months.
Yeah.
And when they come do it either here or Europe, we're talking about 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, EPA requirements, right? I mean, we have the minerals here.
This is the accelerated process.
We just prevent ourselves from being able to do it.
And we're still talking about 5 to 7 years. When you read the reports about the reduction in permitting, it's still 5 years.
Well, not only that, but right now, if you want to know where we stand, 85% of all of the rare earth production comes out of China. And so even if you start right now and you go to other countries that would love to do business with us, and they would love to have contracts with the United States to move rare earth production here, we don't have the capacity, and it is us. It is the regulatory burden that companies bear when they start talking about it. And I'd much rather have the production done here under the regulatory aspects that we expect. But let's expedite this, because you can't continue on with 85% of the production coming out of China.
I wonder if you could use national security waivers to even further reduce some of the timing. I'm not sure.
I would suspect that this president might very well be open to that.
It's only Friday.
We'll see what truth socials we get over the weekend. Horacio, I wanted to switch gears a little bit and open the conversation up about AI. So how far would you say the United States is actually ahead of China when it comes to AI, if you agree with that? And how do you see this race evolving? And maybe we could talk a little bit more about what role, just broadly, technological supremacy plays in this great power competition.
Yeah, I mean, I think the challenge with saying who's ahead and who's behind and all of that is what's the metric? I think that the broadly understood creation of new technology and the exquisite models that have much higher performance, the U.S. is clearly still ahead. Now, as we began to limit the access to those technologies in China, that we, in some ways, forced them into a different track where they're working on lower output models, but that operate at much lower compute requirements. This was the DeepSeek moment, but since then, Baidu and Alibaba have both released models that, again, operate on much lower footprints. They're now multimodal. They're making significant advances. And the challenge there is, if you think about it, we're not just competing with China in terms of bilateral trade. We're competing with China in terms of global influence. This whole rare earth discussion has a lot to do with China getting ahead on the global influence point. And my fear, and David Sachs actually talked about this recently, is that we cannot allow China to do with AI what they did with Huawei and telecom equipment, where relatively cheap telecom equipment proliferates the world ahead of US or European technology. And then you wake up one day with all of these vulnerabilities, allowing that to happen in AI, where countries in the southern hemisphere that don't have access to infrastructure, don't have access to clean energy, clean electricity, they don't have the ability to leverage what we're doing, are actually going to revert to those technologies and give China a huge amount of influence over their infrastructure, over their communications, and even over their public opinion.
I think adoption is very important in terms of metrics. So that's what worries me, is China's ability to adopt at scale much more quickly than the US. So it's adopting the AI capabilities into our military in all the places we need. It's adopting AI into our manufacturing, infrastructure. So the competition is there now with robotics and advanced manufacturing. And you see it across the board, maybe because China can be quite directive, as the senator, pointed out. So it's adoption and scale combined with AI that worries me.
From a defense position, obviously, we need to make sure that we are staying on top of it. I think when we look at the U.S., we are known for innovation. We are known being an entrepreneurial, community and environment, and that's because we have a capitalistic system. What we've seen in the last few years is a lot of these universities are graduating students that are fighting back on that. I think we have to continue recognizing the fact that when we look at innovation, when we look at where things are being created, it's not in China. China copies everybody, they steal our IP. But we need to make sure that we are graduating students and that we are passing legislation that is not stifling the ability for AI to be able to be implemented and be successful. But we are having some guardrails, but we're also encouraging it. And I think, again, you look at the bills that we pass, it has to be encouraging and not stifling.
I talked to a lady last evening for a little bit, and she told me, she says, I don't like AI. I said, it's here. It's not going away. It's going to be a part of our life. But I think part of what we have to do here in the United States is to bring everybody with us in terms of understanding the opportunities that we have. And let me just suggest this. China right now will put out about $30 billion in terms of research into AI on an annual basis. What are we doing? Hell, we can't even get past a continuing resolution right now. I mean, we need to invest in the basics and move forward in such a fashion that the American people actually understand what AI can do for them. And let me just suggest this. I think that's healthcare. And I think that would impact every single family in the United States. Can you imagine what happens when you agentize AI, a system designed literally to improve and to speed up the discovery of new cures and protocols for treating the dread diseases that we have that costs the American taxpayer a huge amount of money to address, but also the quality of life that goes down because we haven't fixed it yet. What happens if, using AI, we speed up the process to actually find out how we can cure or delay the onset of diabetes? What about Alzheimer's? What about Parkinson's? These are all within our reach if we can convince the American people to put some direct investment in, to incentivize the private sector to put additional resources in, but then to create the databases, the accurate databases, so that we can literally train these systems as quickly as possible. Can you imagine what happens? Can you imagine what happens when you start curing cancer? And we're not talking decades away. We're talking months and years away. One individual told me that based upon the technology we have today, what used to take a laboratory 200 years to go through and determine an answer, using our existing technology now, we can do it in milliseconds. Think of what the options are for finding those cures. I think once the American people see the quality of life that can be improved on, that's when they buy into AI and see the benefits of it. And that's when we'll really see the push across the country to develop AI at a rate that you've never seen before by the private sector as well. That's what's going to keep us ahead of China.
To build on your healthcare point, it's discovery, but it's also delivery. I mean, if you look at the amount of time that we have a huge nursing shortage in this country, and it's not getting any better. The demand is far outpacing the supply. It's systemic. We're not going to fix it. But for the fact that if you look at, I chair the board of a children's hospital, and so if you look at what nurses do, obviously the bedside care of a child, I don't think any of us are going to be comfortable giving that to a robot anytime soon. No. Hopefully never in my lifetime. But at the same time, there's so much of the nurse's time, 20, 30, 40%, that is really administrative. Every time they need to administer a medication to a child, there's 20 minutes of paperwork. All of that can go away. And all of a sudden, we can make a nurse 20, 30, 50% more effective at doing the part of the job that's what got him into nursing in the first place, because nobody became a nurse to track down pills. And so I think the opportunity is to really revitalize the economy and to solve some of these perennial blocks are there. And again, if we get there first, much like we did with the internet, much like we did with the highway system, then we get to dictate how the rest of the world operates by the fact that they're going to be adopting our models and our practices. If we get there second, then we're going to be adopting everybody else's stuff.
When it comes to setting the standards for the rest of the world, I just wanted to follow up on something you said, Mike. You said you were implying that it's a good thing for the rest of the world to use U.S. systems, to follow the U.S. example. Do you think that export controls have backfired at all in terms of kind of cutting that off?
No, look, I think we've done the best we could, but I think we've learned. And I think part of it is China's very good at cheating, and they will go to other countries where we think that the product is being delivered someplace. We can go in and check and make sure that the systems are set up. But as soon as our inspectors are gone, that stuff is out and it's on its way back to someplace in China. And so, look, the bottom line is you've got to find a way to keep the compute power here as much as possible, and to be developing it at a rapid scale. They're going to get a hold of it at some stage of the game. We just have to delay the capabilities of them getting a hold of the highest and best use chips as long as possible. Our system is not perfect, but until such time as we find a better way to retain that here, while at the same time still encouraging the rest of the country to use our products, the better off we're going to be. So that there is a risk involved in it, but a bigger risk is not providing that assistance to the rest of the world and having them go to China for whatever they have. Because the rest of the world is recognizing how critical AI is in the development of their countries as well. The one other thing that I'm just going to, we talk about AI like it's one general item here. It's not. It's a whole bunch of things. Earlier today, you had a little bit of a discussion on this, but if we don't get ahead of the energy shortage that we're going to have, the energy shortage here is going to be huge. Right now, we do about 1,300 gigawatts in the gigawatts in the United States today. A half a gigawatt for every one of these new larger centers is about all we're going to be able to have. That's what we're going to take. We have to do an all of the above energy, absolutely, and the sooner we get started on it, the better. And I don't know that we're on that path yet, and we've got to get on that path as quickly as possible, or we will not be the place where these large data centers are going to be placed.
Mm-hmm. And that comes to some of the regulatory issues we spoke about, right? Mm-hmm. And to fit Beth's category of problems that we make for ourselves, getting smaller nuclear reactors online, making sure that we're staying ahead in the fusion race, which is a real one. Look at what China's putting into fusion. It's pretty remarkable. There's supply chain implications of that as well. So, we can learn the lessons over the past decade or 2 decades and apply them right now.
Mm-hmm. I think that's what we're doing. With the policies that were coming out of this one big beautiful bill, that's the focus, is to make sure that we are unleashing American energy and using it above, all of the above solutions. Nuclear, I got to give credit to our state. Governor Abbott has done phenomenal in incentivizing the proliferation of nuclear. Because we are one of those states that people are coming to, whether or not it's bit mining or looking at other high energy use industries. We have to have that. Mm-hmm. We are a growing state, but there's certain things we don't see energy needs decreasing at all. And as much as people love the idea of electric vehicles, they do not get plugged into trees. You have to have an ability to be able to get more power, and I think nuclear is a great solution for the future. And you also have to give credit to President Trump. Look at all of the executive orders that he just signed. Recognizing the fact that our own government is standing in the way of these permits being given and of this technology being advanced. So it is a complicated set of issues that I think being ignorant on in Congress is one of those driving factors. We have to have more, I think, Congress members and senators who understand that some of the connotations that they may have associated with it 50 years ago no longer exist, that the 5th generation, these cells are working, and we just need to allow the private sector to be able to explore it.
Mm-hmm. And Beth, I wanted to stay with you and ask you a bit about tariffs and industrial policy. So the president has criticized the CHIPS Act, saying that all you really need is tariffs, that it was a waste of money. I wonder, do you think that the United States can compete with China using tariffs alone? Is there a need for industrial policy as well?
There was a lot of issues with the CHIPS Act. I mean, first of all, when you put in all the requirements that they had on DEI hires, that actually the monies that should have been given away already on the CHIPS haven't happened because of the strict requirements that they put on, nonsensical, had nothing to do with the actual goal of that act. Tariffs, I think, are one part. You can't look at tariffs in a vacuum. It is part of an overall strategy. I compare it to a Rubik's Cube. I mean, you're twisting and you're turning. We have allowed China, ever since we entered into a free trade agreement with them, to take our lunch. The idea was that China was supposed to somehow become more Western. That never happened. Instead, what they've done is they've stolen our IP, they've stolen our businesses, they've given all sorts of incentives for businesses to move there, and it has been a very detrimental relationship with the U.S. I think tariffs is one part of getting their attention, and also recognizing the fact that we have the #1 marketplace in the world. Countries want to work with us, and we've been giving it away for free. We're now putting $1 of value add on that. And the reciprocity aspect of it, it is fair. We want to have free trade, but we also want to be taken advantage of. And making sure that our companies are able to compete globally is important. And I think tariffs aid in that, but it is one part of an overall strategy, whether or not that's deregulating, and that's a huge focus, whether or not it's these tax cuts that are incentivizing research and development, that are using a bonus depreciation, allowing expensing deductions. It is all part of an overall strategy to make the U.S. more competitive and to really enhance the opportunities for U.S. businesses to be able to build our economy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'll open that up to others too. Do you think the U.S. needs industrial policy as well to compete with China?
Yeah, I think a different way of posing the question is, to what degree does the United States need to reboot and rebuild its manufacturing sector, and in what areas? Mm-hmm. And if you answer that question, yes, we need to. Not everyone does, actually, right? I think a lot of people, actually at this conference, there is a divide about that debate. Larry Summers has done interviews where he's been pretty open about saying, I don't know that we really need to do this, that our strengths are in other areas. I think the alternative view, I think we need to build things in this country that are strategically important for the United States. And I agree completely with Beth that tariffs are a tool. And they're a tool that have been used over time, by our European allies, for instance. 2 years ago, the EU put, anywhere from 17% to sort of 37% tariffs on Chinese EVs. Okay, so the EU is using tariffs all the time in different ways. We use it as one tool. It's not the only tool, but I think it helps us in the context of how do we rebuild key parts of our manufacturing base.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
I would just say this, with regard to what the president's tried to do. If we've got areas where we don't have free trade today, or that we're not able to get into a country because, they're putting tariffs on our stuff and we haven't been doing so, I think we have every right to say, time out, this is going to change, times have changed, we want an equal opportunity both ways. And so I fully support his putting tariffs on those to fix the problem. I think, and he's not the first president to do it. Ronald Reagan in 1985 went to Japan. I've seen his quotes on this where he basically says, look, I don't like tariffs, but you know what? When some other country is not treating us fairly, I'm going to put a tariff on them, and I'm going to make darn sure that we get this thing turned around as quickly as possible. And then he says, and by the way, we're going to take care of this next week when they come in to meet. And his point is you're going to have a tariff, but long term, the best thing for our producers is fair and free trade, not necessarily relying on the need for a tariff long term. So I have no problem with the president coming out and saying, look at all these bad trade deals we've got. Let's get this thing down to equalizing it. We don't have to subsidize other countries by allowing them to put a tariff on our product. So I have no problem at all with the way that he's approached suggesting that tariffs are going to be a key part in allowing us free trade in the future.
And another way of asking the question might also be, how do you compete with a country like China that uses overcapacity and overcapacity is part of its strategy, right? It subsidizes its industries to such a degree that it makes the playing field is not level. So I think the flip side is, what is the operational plan for doing that? How do you structure something competitive with that? And can you get there without tariffs? Not sure you can.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the other piece on this, though, is okay, let's take China for just example, since that's the part we're talking about here. China will walk in and they'll decide, you know what, we want to take over a particular part of the industry, whether it's aluminum, whether it's steel, or whatever it is, and they will literally subsidize with federal assistance their program until such time as they've run our guys out of business. And once that happens, now we don't have it, now they control the market. That's not fair. And so in those particular areas, yeah, do we have to get involved and protect our producers? Absolutely. But at some stage of the game, we've got to have fair and free trade again. We've got to go back to that point of being in a position to win that battle, take away this, or make it clear that we're not going to allow those subsidies to come in a fair market and allow them to take out our producers. And that's what's happened in the past. I think President Trump has pointed that out. And I think it's time that we do something about it, and this is his approach to doing so.
I think we also need to figure out how China has looked at going through loopholes, right? Where they are being tariffed on one thing, let's just use steel, and instead of them actually selling it directly and paying the tariffs, what they'll do is they'll go through another country. They take off the Made in China tag and add Made in Mexico tags to be able to avoid it. I've got a bill level the playing field. It's a bipartisan bill, basically saying that we're going to go after China and make sure that that's not happening. And we're going to make sure that we're looking at the countries and have avenues of being able to protect our U.S. suppliers. And I think when we're talking about the advanced manufacturing, that's going to be even more important going forward in the future.
China is interesting because it, produces a lot of strategic goods, critical minerals, electric vehicle batteries, et cetera. But it also makes just a lot of, like baby strollers, T-shirts. Do you think we should have tariffs across the board on all of those things? Should we be tariffing strollers as well as critical minerals?
You're asking me?
Sure.
I think, look, there are items that are going to be made cheaper in other places, and whether or not that is Laos, Thailand, Cambodia, there's other places that can produce those at a much cheaper rate. Looking at textiles. But I think this administration, I know President Trump, I know Secretary Bessent, we met with Jameson Greer, in front of Ways and Means. They've been very clear. This is a strategic tariff fight. We are not looking at T-shirts. We're not looking at strollers. We are looking at advanced manufacturing that has to do with our national security. And I think they are dealing with each country in an individual capacity, but they're also looking at the overall strategy of saying we have allowed China to take over way too much of these properties and hurt our country. And so this is a mix. Yeah, we want to have fair trade. We want to have free trade, but we also don't want to be taken advantage of.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Great. And we had an interesting audience question submitted here. Businesses are really under pressure to either kind of tack towards the United States or to China. A lot of them are still trying to straddle that divide with varying degrees of success. Do you think the businesses should be forced to choose?
Let me just suggest this. I think businesses will choose, and I think they'll choose us once they realize that if they're going to choose China, then they're going to live under those standards. And part of it is under their laws right now. What you have is made available to the Chinese Communist Party, to the government of China. So you may have trade secrets, but they're no longer your trade secrets. So if you want trade secrets and you want to keep them secret, you can't do that in China by law. If they want information from you regarding your information about other countries, you're required to give it to them. The standards are what's critical. And I think the vast majority of companies that are out there will tell you that they would much rather have the markets here in the United States. They'd much rather be working out of the United States or one of our allies as opposed to China. But China is a huge market. The question is how do you keep your trade secrets? How do you work here and yet be able to market to China? I think they're going to find a way to do that because that is a huge market out there. And I want U.S. companies to be able to trade in China. I want them to be able to do that, but not at the risk of losing patents and copyrights, intellectual properties, or, for that matter, being a strategic partner that ends up hurting the United States with regard of our defensive capabilities for national defense.
Yeah, to build on Senator Round's point, I don't think that this is a question each business has to answer based on the business that they're in and how they operate. If you look at us as Booz Allen, 75% of our portfolio is national security. We do not do any business with China by design. We don't ever want to be in a position where we have to balance the equities of our nation with the equities of a global competitor and adversary. Other businesses that need scale to operate and to succeed need to take a different view about operating across all the largest markets as a competitive requirement for them. And I think we're in a global geopolitical moment where whether we like it or not, whether this is, I think each side will blame the other side, but you see the formation of these two trading blocs beginning to happen, and it's problematic and troubling and hopefully reversible. But the reality is, to the extent that that happens, companies are going to be increasingly more forced to choose, and a lot of the data localization laws and a lot of the manufacturing localization laws that China is being at the leading edge of are going to force those choices much more than the United States.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree in that it's China actually often forcing the choice because it's coercive practices that they're using against American or non-Chinese businesses. And so it is your choice, but recognize where that forcing function is coming from. And historically, China's also flipped on market access too, depending on sectors, right? Companies have gone in hoping for market access, but then losing that access over time.
Mm-hmm. The administration right now is also pushing to revoke Chinese student visas. Curious if any of you have concerns about whether this could end up undermining U.S. technology and scientific research or the position of universities.
You look at Harvard and the fact that 27% of their student body, is here on student visas, and the universities have done this to themselves. They're dependent because their tuition is so high. They're now dependent on foreign students to be able to make up for the tuition of U.S. students who can't afford it. And they are absolutely hotbeds of intellectual property that is being stolen. That's not even a question. The question is, why are we not having more American students that can fill these jobs? So we had a great discussion last night at dinner, and we were saying that we need to start looking at what the United States is focusing on, finding value. And at these universities, what are the majors that they're taking? And why are we paying the same amount in Pell Grants and in federal loans for a gender studies major as for an electrical engineering major? They obviously have different values. We have a business environment that they need this marketable skill, and yet we are giving this much money for this marketable skill. We have students who are graduating after being there 4 or 5 years, 6 years sometimes, where the U.S. is paying them, these universities, for tuition, and they're not getting their value. We are graduating students, and that cannot get jobs, cannot pay back their loans, and it's forcing us to open up our borders to have people come in because they're getting better educations elsewhere, or in our own society, so in our own country, and then leaving. We need to, I think, focus on what these universities are teaching and where we are actually giving federal dollars, whether or not that is allowing tax-exempt status, whether that it's looking at their endowments and where they're getting dollars, or really valuating the value of the majors.
And I would just say it's also the secondary education system in this country, right, which has been a huge failure in terms of reading and math outcomes. And so it even starts below that.
Yeah.
And like the critical minerals problem, we've been talking about that for 40 years and not solving for it.
Mm-hmm.
I've got to just look at, I think we've got to take this country by country, talking from a strategic point with regard to the defense of our country. When we train Chinese students today, we're training probably some of our adversaries' key technical individuals with regard to their military capabilities. So I think Secretary Rubio made the right choice in saying, time out, we're going to hold back on allowing these students coming in from China specifically. We can always revisit it, but I think the message has got to be sent that if we're going to be strategic adversaries, if they're going to be our near-peer competitor, particularly when it comes to areas that are really high on the technological advancements on energy, on space development, on cyber development, and so forth, these are areas in which we are competing with China every single day at the top levels. And we can't simply allow their students to come in here to gain that and then to be either forced to come back through coercion or coming in with the intent of getting as much information and taking it back to their country as possible. So I think we have to look out for ourselves in this particular case, and we've got to be very, very careful that we do not basically train our adversaries in some of the most technically advanced areas in the world today.
I would say that this topic hits close to home. I'm probably the only one in this panel that actually came to this country on a student visa. And I've been here now for 40 plus years, and I think I'm a good contributing member of society. And so I think this is one of those topics. And there's a large number of people that have come to this country either to go to school or to start a business, and who've been, especially in the tech sector, part of the engine that have put the U.S. in this supremacy position. And I think this is something we want to preserve. And at the same time, as Mike points out, in certain fields, in certain areas, at certain levels, because getting an undergraduate in computer science here is not the same thing as getting a PhD where you're doing your dissertation on quantum. We need to be very thoughtful about, especially with people that are geopolitical adversaries, how we're going, whether we're going to allow them access to that training, how we're going to get all of that done. I think this is one of those areas that very much calls for a scalpel and a very targeted approach, but a very targeted approach is also needed.
Great. And I do want to ask about what role the rest of the world should play. So maybe Mike, sticking with you, how do you think the United States should go about involving other countries in this competition with China? And is there any concern that an America First posture or more aggressive use of tariffs could kind of push other countries into China's arms?
We have to be the world leader. There is no question about it. Our adversaries want us to lead. They want us to treat them with respect. They want us to treat them fairly. They want an even, opportunity to negotiate with us and so forth. But in the great power competition that is going on today between China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, and the United States and its allies, we have no choice but to lead. And we don't do that very well if we don't keep our allies with us. So we negotiate good trade deals, and we respect our allies, and we do everything we can to strengthen those relationships. We give them expectations, but we also give them love, so to speak. And I think that's going to be critical. I can't overemphasize enough the fact how deep we are into this strategic competition right now. You got 5 domains: air, land, sea, space, and cyberspace. We fight China in cyberspace every single second of every single day. And in space, we fight China and we fight Russia every single day. They are there, they are for real, they're looking at all of our weaknesses. We need our allies, and they desperately need our leadership. So I think we need to take that role. We take it on, we accept it, but we also expect from them that fair trade back and forth, to where recognizing that if it's a matter of making a deal with Russia or with China or with us, the deal's going to be made with us. And I think, but that's part of that expectation that we've got to do. Soft power is critical for us. There isn't a single member sitting in the Pentagon today that wouldn't rather have an issue among one of the third world countries decided by our offer of soft power and our relationship with them developed through soft power, than to ever have to put a young man or woman wearing our uniform in harm's way to take care of a problem that could have been taken care of with a little bit of TLC up front. So for me, get those allies, keep those allies, work with those allies, but be the leader of the free world.
I agree with you.
An amen?
Yeah. I agree with the senator, but I think we're having this broader debate on the degree to which, these aren't new terms, the shared responsibility, the rebalancing. And I think our allies need to recognize that they are as much a part of the competition, but they're part of the competition. And so far, some of our allies have been more reluctant about kind of rolling up their sleeves and saying, we're in this with you. This is a competition. We need to get serious too. And I think that that's what President Trump is trying to do now. I think if the pillars of the Western alliance collapse because, there have been 3 tense months, then maybe that should, I think it's stronger than that, and I think it'll last, and I think this is a necessary rebalancing, and we'll get through it.
Okay, we're about out of time. I did start the questions on kind of a more pessimistic, alarmist note, asking what you're concerned about. I wanted to ask you each to sum up in just a sentence or two if there's any reason for optimism about America's competitive advantage. I mean, what makes you hopeful, just in brief, to close?
Well, let me put it in defensive purposes, or within the defense thing. I think General Mattis said it best when they asked him what keeps him up at night. And he says, you don't understand. We keep other people up at night, and we need to keep it that way.
Okay.
I think the key competitive advantage of this country is its people. People who were born here, people who came here from other places, and I think that is an endless source of optimism.
I'm optimistic too. I mean, America's a great country with great opportunities, great people, and a great constitution, and I'm optimistic. You need to be optimistic.
Absolutely optimistic, and I'll leave thinking of what Reagan said. We have to fight for it. We're always one generation from losing it. I think we've got an opportunity right now to fight. I think we have an opportunity in a generation to move forward with what we're doing with our taxes, what we're doing with our regulatory reform. But we have a generation that really needs to understand that our country is the reason why the rest of the world is working as well as it is. When the U.S. does well, the rest of the world does well. We don't have people who are fighting to get out of our country. We have people who are fighting to get here.
Exactly.
We need to respect that, we need to fight for it, and we need to move forward.
Great. Fascinating conversation. Thank you so much, all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.